Again, good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. So today we'll discuss a little bit about what happened on the Mojaloop core. This is from the maintenance and release team. Though it's just going to be Miguel and myself presenting today. We have several other colleagues and contributors from the community, but primarily wanted to recognize Shashi, Steven, Valentin, and Vijay as contributors here, though there are many more of our friends from the community who contributed there. Today, because this is going to be a compact session, like most of our sessions today, we'll just directly jump into our agenda, skipping the usual checklist. We look at our use cases, resources, and things like that. So we'll first look at some of the maintenance items. We have the Mojaloop Helm releases that we'll look at, and as part of maintenance, we'll also look at some minor feature changes and along with bug fixes. We look at the designs that aim to make notifications more reliable. And then we look at some of the enhancements made in settlements functionality. So here is a depiction of our bug fixes and bug process. In the project repository, we have templates for feature requests or bugs. Any community member is free to raise an issue there. And then it goes through this process. I don't want to detail the whole process here, but thanks to Leslie Ann for interviewing us about this and putting together as a diagram. So we have a bug triage meeting. Usually these happen twice a week. And we look for new bugs and triage them. And then we identify owners, or there are volunteers who can take those and fix them. Then they're fixed and released. You can look at this in detail when we publish this on the documentation artifacts report. Overall, I think this PI, I just looked at the number of bugs we looked at from in each of the 6 sprints this PI. We had a total of 25 bugs released, and some of the representative bugs are there here. There are a lot of bugs dealing with setup and infrastructure, but also some with some key functionality there, as you can see here. I don't want to go into each of the details here, but some of those were logged by our current implementers, especially in Mojaloop, and some by the core team and or other partner teams as well, as they are using the Mojaloop core. We had a big Helm release in the previous PI. Helm release what we call V12. It's actually V12.0.0. As you all know by now, we've moved to the semantic versioning, which is now a standard, not just for Helm releases, but all of our release versioning, all of our services releases. The main feature, of course, was the inclusion of continuous growth settlement, thanks to the settlements team that actually implemented the feature. But in this PI, we were able to, in the past PI, that is PI13, we were able to take it and merge it into master branch after doing some prerequisites and some standardization to be compatible with the Mojaloop OSS standards. Along with this, we now have native Helm test functionality through the Mojaloop testing toolkit. There were several enhancements in the testing toolkit, and the major enhancement there was where we can run Helm tests and get the results directly there. Along with that, there are some scripting notifications improvements. As you can see on the right side here, we have a total of 16 bugs there, as I've indicated before. A lot of them are functional changes. So as we always do, we always advocate and encourage for implementers to get the latest release because all of these are now fixed. A lot of them are dealing with sub-ID related functionality, some setup and infrastructure. There are some long-standing bugs there, which I'm very happy to see them fixed now. Not just that, even after the most recent Helm release, we always have what we call development releases that are available. Any merge into master will include kind of like a development release if someone is in an urgency to take those. And we are looking at version 12.1.0 release, which will happen in the coming PI in a few weeks. Miguel here will take us through the rest of the presentation. Miguel.
Thanks, Sam. So as Sam mentioned, we're busy working on the 12.10 release. It's currently a work in progress. A lot of these changes have already been introduced into the main branch. We're targeting a release of 2 to 3 weeks post the community meeting. And I would say a lot of these are quality of life changes at the moment and some major bug fixes, but I'll go through the major points. So from a maintenance perspective, with 12.00, there was a bit of an issue with the deployment of the EFX stack, which is Elasticsearch, Fluentd, Kibana, and APM charts. After running that stack for a period of time, it would fall over. So there were some issues and bugs with that as a result of the version. So we've upgraded that to the more recent versions, and that has resolved that problem, which is great. So we are now able to run that stack in our OSS dev environment without any issues, and it seems fairly stable. From a new feature perspective, the PI13 team also introduced some changes for the central ledger account lookup service, specifically exposing some environmental variables that enable the PI13 features within those services. So that's currently that will be included. From a central settlements perspective, there's 2 enhancements. I'll get into more detail about them in a later slide, but basically one is the separation of the CGS functionality and the rules capabilities that we have. And the second is about the default settlement models. And there's also been some updates to the testing toolkit. So there's been some improvements to the mobile simulator, specifically around providing more information about what's going on within the switch. And actually, previously, if you use the mobile simulator, you would have seen basic information about what's going on. And the focus was more about the transfers. Now you'll see information about the accounts for the actual participants from the payer to the payee banks. Additionally, we have MTLS support, and we also have some improved collection manager and environment manager components in the test runner page. And now you'll be able to load the environmental variables as well as the collections directly from the test runner page, which is a great improvement. But more importantly, there's going to be additional stuff that's not listed here. So as new bugs and stuff occur prior to this release, we will try and include as much as we can into that. So this list is not exhaustive or extensive by any means. So let's talk about the settlement enhancements. So the first is about the documentation. In the previous PI, we released the continuous gross settlement and rules engine, where we were able to implement the interchange fees. So we've now documented that there's a pull request that's currently pending the release of 12.10. So that will be published as soon as the final updates on the next 2 points are released. The second being about the default settlement models. So currently, when you deploy a new Mojaloop installation, a hub operator is required to configure the supporting settlement models for either deferred or CGS. But additionally, one has to specify a currency when doing so. That means that a settlement model must be configured for every currency supported by the hub. In 12.10, you'll be able to configure a default settlement model in addition to any currency-specific models. So what that means is whatever currencies a hub supports, the default settlement model will cater for those particular transfers that are processed through the system, but you still have the option to create specific settlement models for a specific currency if required. The third is a separation of the type coupling between the CGS and the rules engine. So in the diagrams you can see here on PI12, we have in the middle the central settlements window. That's been moved to the right. It's just been renamed to deferred settlement. That's just because it's a better naming for the responsibilities of the component. But the more important thing is at the bottom here, we have the central settlements component. And because of the tight coupling between the rules engine and the CGS, if the CGS logic would fail, the rule would not execute. And similarly, if the rule failed, the CGS would fail due to a rollback. So this impacted obviously the usability of this component. It meant that if you deployed this component, you didn't have an option whether you wanted CGS without rules or if you just wanted the rules without CGS. As a result, this obviously hindered your options for deployment as well as the scalability of this component. So in 12.10, we've separated out these components into their own microservices. So they will operate independently of each other, and it will allow hub operators to have the flexibility to choose how they wish to deploy the settlements. The second item is about reliable notification design. So in the previous PI, there was a draft for the reliable notification design itself. In this PI, we've realigned it to the reference architecture. You will hear more about the reference architecture work in the first session tomorrow, I believe. So please, please join that. And I think that'll be a very interesting discussion. But inevitably, all the changes that we've done for this realignment are very much aligning to some of the principles that have been defined by an outcome of that reference architecture discussions. So the main changes being that this notification event handler here was originally in the central services itself. This has now been moved into the notification engine component. And this is a result of the single responsibility principle, one of the key principles that have been basically defined by the reference architecture. And this means we're able to store and report on notifications that the notification is processing as such. The second item, which is also related to the first, is about moving the store. The store was also in the central services. That's also been moved into the notification engine. And this is, once again, a result of that single responsibility principle. But in addition, it's also an enhancement to the reliability of the component. So the fact that the notification engine is able to keep state, we are now able to implement a state engine within the engine itself. And therefore, if any notification fails mid-processing, it's able to recover and continue that particular notification from where once it left off without any interruption as a result of that. The third is very much about constructing the notification itself. This was also handled, well, originally handled by the notification event handler, which once again was part of the central services, but this has now been moved to the ML API adapter. So the ML API adapter is the component that's receiving the FSP IOP requests or the Mojaloop API requests and processing them. And as such, as part of the reference object, this component is also now responsible for not only managing the notifications themselves and how to format them and transform them into the FSP IOP API specification. And once again, this is a result of the principles that are defined by the reference architecture. And this allows things like to switch out the ML API adapter for different types of API specifications, like the ISO 20022 specification, etc. So it's now up to the FSP IOP to receive those internal notifications from the central services and translate them into something that's meaningful to that adapter. And that brings us to the fourth thing. As a result of that, that also means that this callback handler is also responsible for processing any compensating actions. And there's two reasons why you want to do this. It could be that the specification that's implemented by this adapter may need to have additional logic around notifications and maybe handling retries. So as the notification engine produces delivery reports, we may want to not have the notification engine actually do the retry logic. We want to, based on that specification, we may want the retry logic to move inside here. So when this callback handler sends the notification event to the notification engine, it would potentially provide options to say how the retry mechanisms would work within the notification engine. It may even disable the retry mechanisms if necessary. And it would be totally up to the FSP callback handler if required to actually handle that and handle that compensating. And in addition to that, we could also do other compensating actions like send events back to the central services to potentially abort a transfer, or even maybe handle timeouts. A couple of interesting links that you might find useful. There's a link to the feature design story. There's a link to the documentation pull request that's also been updated with these changes. And maybe more interestingly, the DA discussion where this was presented, or where this realignment was presented, is over here. You can access the meeting minutes as well as the recording of the actual discussion itself. And lastly, demos. We have a couple of demos that have been produced by the core OSS team. Specifically, you can access them through the portal for the community events. The first one being about operational monitoring, about distributed tracing. It will go through the event framework overview, as well as go through a tracing demo, showing you what it's like to see an end-to-end trace, and as well as how to link those traces to audits, and potentially also how to identify errors through tracing and view the resulting error logs. The second demo is about the real-time instrumentation, and this is about the Prometheus and Grafana stack, which we call Promfana. And it's pretty much how it's used in our deployment, and also discussing an overview of what dashboards we currently have out of the box, and also going into detail actually on the ML API adapter, showing you what those metrics are like and how they're instrumented and how they are actually presented. The last demo is about settlements itself. This is going to be published more or closer to when we release the v12.1.0 Helm release. So keep your eye open. There'll be a communication sent out when that's available. Thanks very much. Do we have any questions, Sam? I don't know if you want to say anything else.
Thanks, Miguel. Miller has a question. Just wanted to also add, there is a kind of an appendix section where I've included a slide about typical Helm release process. Feel free to review that as well. Miller, please go ahead.
Thanks, guys. This is great update. I'm very excited about the notification engine. I think that's a very good solution. And I want to look more closely at that documentation. Thank you for that. I'm noting that this is a fairly recent, I think maybe in the last couple of days, item that Grafana has decided to switch their licensing model to AGPL. But it's going to make that platform unsuitable for us. Their AGPL is not a harmonized license with Apache 2.0. And so that suggests that we'll need to look for an alternative. And I wanted to assess if you have any ideas about how impactful that will be to us. I don't know what the transition period will look like for that either. So it's something that we'll have to look more closely, but have you assessed the impact?
We've had an initial discussion about it on the DA, and it's something definitely that we need to follow up on. But we also did note that the mechanisms that we currently use to expose the metrics from our services, it's very much very closely aligned to the open metrics specification that's available, which is actually more or less, the Prometheus team is actually one of the ones that are part of that board that are defining that standard. And as such, the metrics that we expose are very closely aligned to that. So to be able to switch out the Prometheus stack to something else, I don't think would be require a lot of work if necessary, if worse came to worse. But I'm still not convinced that that's going to be necessary. I still think there's further discussions that need to be around the licensing, just to confirm whether it is an issue before we do anything drastic, I think.
Yeah, obviously we want to assess this. I did this some time ago, that AGPL v3 is not harmonized with us. It's the purpose of AGPL 3 is a reaction to open source communities that were bothered by Amazon and other super platforms hosting their software as a service, and so they prevent that, and so it's not commercially friendly. And as you can imagine, we imagine in the future that Mojaloop could be hosted exactly in that form, and that would be very good for us, and something that we want to enable. And that would mean that would not be possible to use the Prometheus Grafana combination in that kind of hosting environment, and that becomes commercial friction for adoption. So I think I mean, we certainly should do more analysis, not only of the impact to us, but what would be the pathway if we need to make a pathway. One more quick question, though. I understood this was related to Grafana. Does it also relate to Prometheus? Are they in fact the same platform, or are these different things?
They're different things, right? So Grafana is more the visualization tool that plugs into Prometheus. So, I mean, if as long as Prometheus still maintains their current licensing, there's no reason why we couldn't even switch out that visualization layer for an alternative.
That's what I thought. And so it would seem to me that the first thing you did was to assess whether the metrics being collected are aligned more or less to a developing standard, and it is. That's great. The other is that Prometheus as such is not yet implicated by this licensing change. So as the metrics enter the stack, it sounds like it's not hugely a problem, but then it's a question of what happens next. How do you go through visualization? That's more of a front end system, as I understood it, how you would in your operations center, for instance, provide graphical access to those the metrics.
Yeah. And something else I think we also need to consider is fully adopting open telemetry. So that's another, let's say, standard that's been kind of actually matured over the last year and a half. And that is actually completely, let's say, provider independent. You're able to switch out back-end ingestion engines fairly easily. And it even provides an overlay for the tracing standards as well. So it's more than just metrics. It also includes the tracing capabilities in a standard way. It lets you switch out whether you use the open tracing standard or whether you use one of the other proprietary ones. It allows you to do that via wrapper framework library.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Miller, for the questions. I think we have a break, so we need to wrap this session up. So thanks, everyone.
Cool. Thanks very much. Have a good day, guys.
Bye.
Keep safe.